This is ABC World News.
Good evening. It reads like a spy novel. A huge trove of documents released just hours ago by the whistleblowing website WikiLeaks lifts the curtain on the secret communications between Washington and the diplomats that we have stationed all over the globe. There are more than 250,000 documents in all, some of them confidential messages containing candid and often embarrassing observations about foreign leaders. John Carl starts us off tonight in Washington. John, good evening.
Good evening, Dan. It's important to point out that only about 15,000 of those 250,000 documents are actually classified, and of those, none of them are classified at the top secret level. But, Dan, there is enough in there to cause some real embarrassment and potentially much worse.
Some of the most fascinating documents are about Iran, depicting Arab leaders practically begging the U.S. to prevent the Iranian government from getting nuclear weapons. That program must be stopped, Bahrain's king tells General David Petraeus in November 2009. The danger of letting it go on is greater than the danger of stopping it. The foreign minister of the United Arab Emirates says Ahmadinejad is Hitler and tells a top State Department official, quote, the threat from al-Qaeda would be minor if Iran has nukes. In these private dispatches posted online by the New York Times and other papers, several Arab governments take a line virtually identical to Israel's. In another meeting with General Petraeus, the Saudi ambassador to the U.S. describes King Abdullah urging the U.S. to attack Iran, saying, quote, the use of military pressure against Iran should not be ruled out. But Defense Secretary Robert Gates is quoted telling France's defense minister that an attack on Iran would only delay Iranian plans by 1 to 3 years, while unifying the Iranian people to be forever embittered against the attacker. Many of the documents are simply embarrassing. For example, in the effort to close Guantanamo, the State Department plays what the New York Times calls let's make a deal, offering foreign governments rewards for agreeing to take prisoners. Slovenia, for example, is told that if it wants to get a meeting with President Obama, it needs to take a prisoner. In an apparent sign of corruption, U.S. drug agents catch Afghanistan's vice president in the UAE with $52 million in cash. The DEA officials looked the other way. Libyan leader Muammar Gaddafi's visit to New York last year is the subject of several documents detailing his strange behavior, including his relationship with a, quote, voluptuous blonde described as his senior Ukrainian nurse, always by his side. One of the most damaging documents describes a meeting in January between General Petraeus and the president of Yemen, where the United States has conducted several secret drone strikes on suspected al-Qaeda targets. We'll continue saying the bombs are ours, not yours, Yemen's president tells Petraeus, prompting another Yemeni official at the meeting to joke that he had just lied by telling Parliament that Yemeni forces had carried out the attack.
U.S. officials have condemned the leaks as outrageous and dangerous, and, Dan, they have taken steps to ensure that nothing like this can ever happen again. For example, in changes that have already been implemented, it is now impossible for a single individual to move classified information off a government computer.
John, stick around because we want to come back to you in just a moment. But let's go now to Jim Sciutto, who's over in London. Jim, given the angry response we're hearing from the Obama administration tonight, the question is, how bad is all of this for our national security?
Well, Dan, the key effect here may be diplomatic discomfort, but serious enough discomfort to affect key relationships with U.S. allies. And in a sign of just how concerned U.S. officials are, the damage control began long before today's release. There are unflattering views of key U.S. allies. Russian President Vladimir Putin mockingly called the alpha dog. French President Nicolas Sarkozy, the emperor with no clothes. But the real damage may be to those we call allies in the fight against terrorism. Afghan President Hamid Karzai is described as, quote, driven by paranoia. His brother believed to lie, quote, when it suits his needs. And there's that revelation about Yemen's president, agreeing to lie about U.S. airstrikes in his country. Will that hamper the U.S. counterterror effort there going forward? For WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange, the question is what he believes the revelations will accomplish, one we raised with him during a documents release earlier this year.
What drives you? Defending victims. And I'm a combative person, so I like crushing bastards. So it is deeply, personally, deeply satisfying to me.
U.S. officials argue, however, the release will actually create more victims, exposing and damaging local leaders, dissidents, and diplomats who the White House says are working to end wars Assange opposes. And so they say he's actually working against his own stated goals. Dan?
A lot of focus on that man tonight. Jim, stand by. I want to bring John back in. John, on this question of whether these leaks will hurt our interests abroad, one of the things we keep hearing from the White House is that it will compromise our intelligence assets. People who give us information in secret will be named in some of these documents, they say. How serious a concern is that really?
Well, there are certainly concerns that lower-level sources can be named and that their lives can be put at risk, Dan. But in terms of real top intelligence assets, spies and foreign governments, those kind of names you would never see in documents classified at this level. Those would be classified in top secret at the minimum. And as we said earlier, there are no top secret documents in these leaks.
And one last question for you, Jim. Apparently, this story is not over. There are more revelations to come. What do we know about that?
Well, there are 250,000 documents we've seen today, just the highlights of some of them, a small percentage of them, and dozens of news stories planned over the course of this week. We know in the UK, for instance, there are going to be revelations about devastating criticism of the UK's military operations in Afghanistan by U.S. commanders, as well as criticisms of the British leader David Cameron. So possibly more diplomatic discomfort, Dan, to come.
As we said, more revelations to come, and as you said, more diplomatic discomfort to come. Jim Sciutto and John Carl reporting on WikiLeaks tonight. Thank you both.